Good evening. I'm Samantha Valentino. Thanks for joining us here on WKYT Plus. Violent crime in Lexington is down. That's according to data collected by Lexington police. In 2025, Lexington had the lowest number of homicides it's seen in more than a decade. Tonight, we're taking you beyond those numbers to explore the reasons Lexington police believe crime is down. We sit down with Chief Lawrence Weathers to learn more about how police are investigating and working to prevent homicides and shootings. We'll also hear from the director of One Lexington, Divine Karama, about the work he's doing to address gun violence in Lexington. Now, first, let's start with those numbers. In 2025, there were 20 homicides in Lexington. Now, that's the lowest since 2013, when that total was also 20. You can see this spike here in 2022. That's when the city saw a record-breaking number of homicides with 44. And we've seen homicides continue to drop since 2022, as well as shootings. Now, as you can see, there's not quite as much data going back as far when it comes to shootings, but you can see the peak was actually 2021, which is as far back as this data goes on the Lexington Police website, with 136. In 2022, when we saw a record-breaking number of homicides, that number of shootings was 119, and it's continued to drop as the years have gone on. As we skip ahead to 2025, there were a total of 50 last year. Now, it's also important to note, just 9 days into 2026, we've already seen 2 acts of gun violence. On New Year's Day, 3 people were shot in a parking lot off of South Broadway. 2 of them were killed. The third survived, but was left with serious injuries. On January 5th, police say a 16-year-old shot a woman on Hedgewood Court. The teen was arrested. The woman was taken to the hospital with life-threatening injuries. These shootings are exactly why Lexington Police Chief Lawrence Weathers tells me he doesn't ever want to celebrate when shootings and homicide numbers go down, because people are still being killed.
I have to look at those numbers in a very positive way, but I also have to realize that we still have work to do, because we're not at zero. And I know it's unrealistic to think that we'll get there, but I'm gonna try.
Now, Chief Weathers doesn't want to harp on the numbers, but they do show that something is working.
There's some things that we were doing from an investigative perspective, and from a community perspective, and from a technology perspective that we feel may have contributed to that. But you can't just rely on one thing. Public safety is not just the police department's concern. It should be everybody's concern. And that's why, we focus on being involved in the community, not just when things are bad, but when things are good, and being involved in community on a personal level too.
Now, the importance of community involvement isn't something that's new for Chief Weathers. I've done these year-in-review interviews with him every year since I joined the team here at WKYT in 2022. Every time we talk, he emphasizes the role the community plays in solving and preventing crime. But the community's willingness to interact with police relies on them trusting law enforcement. Now, let me show you this here. Gallup has been measuring Americans' confidence in police since 1993. Between then and 2019, they say a majority of Americans had high confidence in police, including a record high of 64% in 2004. But after George Floyd was killed by police in Minneapolis during an arrest in 2020, confidence in police fell to 48%. Now, again, these polls are of Americans as a whole and how they view police overall. But Chief Weathers says they felt that shift here in Lexington, too. It's taken some work to build the community's trust back up, but he feels the Lexington Police Department has been successful in rebuilding that relationship.
I'm born and raised here, so when I'm off duty, I go out and I'm at the grocery store, I'm wherever, walking through neighborhoods and stuff like that, because I got friends here and family here and everything like that. And no matter where I go, somebody will come up to and approach me and say, hey, the police here are doing a good job. And hey, by the way, I have this happening. Can you have somebody come look at that? I don't think people would do that if we don't put ourselves out there to make us approachable. So I can't go anywhere without that happening. So I'd have to say there's been an increase in that, and that to me translates into an increase of trust. and that makes the difference.
Building community trust is just one thing Chief Weathers says has contributed to that drop in violent crime. He feels their investigative approach and technology have also helped. Let's start with that investigative approach, though. Chief Weathers says they've really focused on intelligence-led policing. It helps to prevent and disrupt crime, and the community plays a large role in it.
We try to investigate those people who we receive information on that are involved in, and since we're talking about violent crime, involved in violent crime. And we kind of focus on that, in hopes that leads us to maybe arrest people that are involved in some of our homicides or serious assaults. So we couldn't do that if people didn't talk to us.
Chief Weathers has been in his position since 2018, but he first joined the Lexington Police Department in 1989. So he's had a front row seat as policing has evolved through the years. One of the biggest changes has been technology. It's something he says plays a huge part in the department's ability to solve and prevent crimes. Now, this is a look at the department's real-time intelligence center. A few years ago, the department added a program called FUSIS to the RTIC. It integrates flock cameras, traffic cameras, body cameras, and even cameras belonging to private citizens and businesses who opt in to grant the department access in case of a nearby emergency. Commander Matthew Greathouse with the Lexington Police Department walks us through FUSIS.
On this screen here, you will actually see my body cam is right here down headquarters. So what this screen is really busy, but I put everything and all the layers on here so we can explain what each one of these are. So the triangles are, there's two different colors. There's a green and a red. The reds are high priority calls and the greens are low priority calls. You have the gray areas here where you see a number 4 or 5. Those are our traffic cameras. So those are all listed on the map. We have just regular locations, and then we have officers that are actually out in the field actively taking calls. So this is live right now, and you'll see the screen move and things like that. So our body cameras, there's a few different colors. There's blue, there's gray, and there's green with a red circle that is flashing. The blues mean they're just buffering and they're ready to be recorded if the officers activate them. And then you have the red flashing around the green that you'll see here right downtown. That's somebody actively recording right now.
And we mentioned people can register their private cameras into FUSIS. Now, there are 2 tiers to that. One is letting officers know you have a camera so that if something happens in the area, they can contact you to ask to check the footage. Level 2 is granting them direct access to your camera feed to view it in case of an emergency. The department also uses the city's traffic cameras, which anyone can access online, to help officers responding to a call.
We've had those for over 20 years. And we found out how to, or technology has developed to show us how to tap into those and how to use those to generate information in real time. And that leads us to our real-time intelligence center, to where when officers are responding to a call, we can get eyes there near the scene, or we can go get eyes on the scene as something is happening, or we can go back and look and see, hey, something did happen there. But as officers are going to the scene, the Real-Time Intelligence Center is relaying information to them. So that makes a safer environment for them, and it makes it a safer environment for the community.
Flock license plate readers are also part of the Real-Time Intelligence Center. When the city first started talking about purchasing those flock cameras, some community members feared they'd be used to spy on people. The city and the department have remained adamant that they're solely an investigative tool and are not used for surveillance. There were also concerns about where those cameras would be placed. So let me show you this now. This is a map of where those 125 flock cameras are located across the city. And then if we scroll down here, this is a heat map created by the city of Lexington. It shows where the most violent crimes occur. City leaders say this data was used to determine where flock cameras should be placed. Now, access to flock cameras is very different from accessing the other cameras in the Real-Time Intelligence Center. Flock cameras aren't live. They snap pictures of license plates on cars as they pass by. Now, let's take a look at this. This is what officers see when they search the system. And Lexington police tell us in order to make a search, they must have a reason. The department says officers must list that reason when they enter the search into their system, and there must be a case number associated with it. Now, every quarter, the department's Public Integrity Unit releases an audit of how often flock cameras are being used and if they were misused. These audits can be viewed on the department's website for anyone to see. They also track how many crimes the flock cameras help officers solve. Now, you can see here, since the first flock camera went up in March 2022, the city says flock cameras have helped them find 30 missing people, recover more than $5 million in stolen vehicles, seize 154 firearms, helped charge 758 people with more than 1,800 charges, and generated 200 leads for investigations.
Then we have to talk about DNA. DNA was very expensive. It's still expensive, but not as it once was. So now we can utilize that to help give us leads on crime. And you still have to do the investigation and everything like that. So I don't think technology will ever take the place of people. But those are some of the things that we're focusing on, that we look at, that maybe this is what's helping us trend down. How can we make it better?
We've heard Chief Weathers talk about how important the community is in solving and also preventing crimes. One Lexington focuses on reducing gun violence among Lexington's youth and young adults. In addition to gun violence dropping overall in Lexington last year, the city experienced its fourth straight year of declining gun violence among youth and young adults. Chief Weathers gives One Lexington and their community partners a lot of credit for that drop. After the break, we'll sit down with One Lexington Director Divine Karama to discuss the work he and his team do every day to create change. We're back in 2 minutes. Welcome back in here on WKYT Plus. As you can see, we are now joined by Divine Karama, Director of One Lexington. First, Divine, thank you so much for being here.
No problem.
For anyone who somehow doesn't know you or your work, kind of explain what One Lexington is and what the goal is.
Yeah, so One Lexington is an organization designed to reduce and address youth and young adult gun violence in Lexington. And obviously, the police department, law enforcement, the justice system is kind of the first thing that people think of when you think of reducing crime. But there has to be a community component. And so what One Lexington does is kind of galvanize, unify all of these different elements of community-based approaches, and we pull it together for a strategy that we call All Hearts on Deck. So everything from collaborate with the school system to survivors of gun violence, the faith community, credible messengers who have that lived experience, and all creating a strategy to try to prevent gun violence before it happens. And in the case that it does, we try to support those who've been directly affected.
And you all focus in specifically on youth and young adults. Talk to us about that age group and why it's important to focus on the young people here in Lexington.
We do. And so, enough, we actually probably touch about 90% of all gun violence that happens. Because as long as somebody is in the household that was affected, that is within that age purview, we respond. And so that we usually touch most of the gun violence that happens. But the reason we're intentional about the age purview of 10 to 29 is the data tells us the majority of the drivers of gun violence and those affected fall within that age purview. And intentionality is important in this work, right? You don't want to be spinning your wheels. You want to hone in and focus on those who are most likely to be in that cycle of violence. And so that's who we target. But again, this is a community wide. So we really touch most of the gun violence that happens within the city.
And, obviously, we heard from Chief Weathers. We discussed at length that violent crime overall in Lexington has gone down year over year. It's the lowest it's been in more than a decade.
Yeah.
And specifically also within the age group that you all focus on, we've seen it go down year after year. Kind of talk to me about that, what you all have found looking at the numbers and what that means.
Yeah, I think for us, well, first and foremost, it's good to acknowledge that progress because it gives people hope, and you have to let people know what's working, what's not. But I think for us that are on the front lines of this work, it's hard to celebrate, right? Because one life loss is too many. And so first I want to say that because a lot of our survivors don't care about the numbers because they're still living with that pain. But we have seen progress 4 straight years, and I think that's because of the community stepping up and coming together to support our other elements of public safety that are doing a great job. And so, there's an old adage about not just pulling people out of the river, but how do you go upstream and figure out why they keep falling in the river, right? And so, whether it's mentoring services, whether it is food insecurity, addressing poverty, whether it is employing some of our young men and women who may have had a past life in the streets, right, and looking for an alternative pathway, it's creating those pathways. It's supporting survivors who've been directly affected. It's mediating some of these street beasts. And so all of that are things that the community has to step up and do. Law enforcement's job is to enforce the law, right? Our job as a community is to be a village. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that, but we can be better. And I look forward to seeing that through.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something that we really want to continue to emphasize. We don't want these conversations to be confused as a celebration
Yeah,
of
yeah,
the decline. They're conversations to explore it because we have to look at the numbers and see, okay, and we heard this from the chief, and I know this is something you all look at as well.
yeah.
What are we doing that's working? How can we continue to build on that? What's maybe not working, to continue to eventually get to what police say is their goal, and I know you've said is also your goal for those numbers to eventually hit 0.
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I think one is those alternative, right, pathways, opportunity, right? Nothing can substitute opportunity. If we want to tell these young men and women to leave the street life alone, what is going to be the alternative? And if we don't have that alternative, we can't expect them to leave that life alone. And so that is where the community, city government's got to create those opportunities. I think the other part is those root causes. People aren't born violent, right? It's circumstance, it's environment. And so, what are we doing to address those root causes so they don't end up in that cycle? Whether it is poverty, food insecurity, education opportunity, employment opportunities. And so, for us to continue seeing this progress, we got to focus on those root causes, not demonize those who are in the cycle, but try to figure out how can we interrupt it, right?
Absolutely. And I want to talk now about the wide range of work that you do.
Yeah.
I've seen you're one of the first people at the scene when gun violence does unfortunately happen in our city, and you're trying to find anybody who was there, anybody who was impacted, the family of the victim, the friends, anyone who is unfortunately being touched by this violent act, and getting your arms around them and trying to figure out how to support them from that moment on. But you're also in our schools. You're hosting summer programs and school break programs and working with youth who maybe haven't even been touched by gun violence to try
That's
to
right.
get your arms around them as well. So kind of give us, I know there's a lot that you do, and it would probably take well beyond a more than a full half-hour special to talk about it, but just
Yeah.
give us an idea of that range of work that One Lexington does.
Yeah, I don't think people have a clue, right? It can literally start with being on the scene of a homicide, maybe even having to enact your stop the bleed training and address a gunshot victim because you may be in proximity of a shooting, to mediating two groups that have a beef with one another. It could be attending court and advocating for young people who are looking for an alternative sentencing option. From summer programs to in-school mentoring to our No Cap program, which creates free programming for young people who've been directly affected by gun violence. Sometimes it is answering my phone at 3 a.m. when it's a young person that has nobody else to talk to and is feeling like they might hurt themselves or somebody else, and you got to be there for them. So it is a holistic job, right? I tell people all the time, it's really not even a job; it's a calling. But it's a calling that I've answered, and not just me, but many individuals and organizations within our city. And so I want people to know that gun violence prevention starts way before a gun is even involved. It is ministering to those who are struggling with their mental health. It is providing jobs for those who need jobs. It is creating or providing a meal for those who are hungry. That is where the prevention truly starts. And so there's not a dull day in this position for sure. But I will note that it's not just One Lexington. It's our community partners. We got a lot of people on the front lines that are doing this work each and every day. And that's what all hearts on deck means, right? All of us stepping up, all hearts, all hands on deck, playing a role, figuring out where you fit in. And I feel like it's made a difference.
And it definitely, that number of people working to prevent gun violence is growing as we're seeing those numbers go down. But of course, it is unfortunately still an issue. You know, we've already seen gun violence unfortunately take some lives just a few days into the new year. So as we look ahead to the rest of 2026, what would you say your goals are to continue to move forward on this mission?
I think for me is you got to stay the course. I think in this work, oftentimes we focus on the negative parts, right? And as soon as a shooting happens or we have a spike, everybody wants to abandon the strategy. Everybody, what are we gonna do? Everybody loses their mind. But the progress we've seen is because of this strategy. And so a strategy isn't something that you just let go of when there are challenges or obstacles. So I think we got to stay the course, right? But I think getting more people involved, I think some of our systems could be a little bit more open to those with lived experiences. And so people who may have committed some crimes when they were younger, 20, 30 years ago, those individuals aren't allowed to volunteer at schools because of their record. They're not even allowed to volunteer at a community center, but they might have the lived experience that could change some of these young men and women's lives. And so I think getting our systems to catch up with where the work is and the reality of what's going on. I love to see more money going into grassroots organizations and survivor-led organizations. And so that's all in our budget, things we're going to be advocating for. So yeah, we're ready to push this work forward in 2026 for sure.
Well, we're excited to see how that work continues. And as always, we appreciate you being here and
Anytime.
taking the time to sit down with us. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back in. We just heard from One Lexington director Divine Karama about the work One Lexington and their community partners do to prevent gun violence among youth and young adults. Lexington Police Chief Lawrence Weathers has also always emphasized the importance of working with this age group. I asked him why. Here's what he had to say.
It's the same old adage that always, if you want, if you want to have a good city, you have to have good people. And leading people down the path to be good people, that's going to give you the safe city.
And as we continue through 2026, Chief Weathers says he wants to continue to build on those relationships with the community, along with the technological and investigative tools that have proven to be successful in solving and preventing violent crimes here in Lexington. Thanks for joining us here on WKYT Plus. Have a great night.